I never expected the call to stay with me, replaying like a broken record in my mind. But when you're a 911 operator, you learn quickly that some voices cling to you like shadows in the corners of your memory. It started like any other shift. The fluorescent lights in the dispatch room buzzed faintly, competing with the hum of computers and low murmurs of my colleagues. A fresh cup of coffee sat steaming by my keyboard, and I'd just finished logging the details of a fender bender when the line lit up. 911, what's your emergency? I asked, my voice steady and professional. At first, there was only silence, followed by the faintest sound, a child breathing, shaky and uneven. Hello? I prompted again. This is 911. Are you able to speak? Then I heard it, a trembling whisper so soft I had to press the headset closer to my ear. They're outside. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the clock. 10:47 p.m. Who's outside, sweetie? Can you tell me your name? I kept my tone calm, gentle. The monsters. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. It wasn't unusual for kids to exaggerate or call on pranks, but there was something in the child's voice, raw terror, a kind of fear no kid could fake. Okay, I said carefully, typing into the system. Possible child in distress. Where are you? Can you tell me your address so I can send someone to help? There was a muffled sound, like the child was moving the phone. Then a faint sniffle. They're at the windows. Please hurry. I leaned forward in my chair, adrenaline kicking in. Stay with me, okay? Are your parents home? Silence. Sweetie, are you alone? Can you tell me your name? The sound of glass tapping interrupted my question. A steady tick-tick-tick that made my skin crawl. They're looking for me, the child whispered. They're tall. My fingers flew over the keyboard, flagging the call as urgent. I'm sending someone to your house right now. Can you hide somewhere safe? Maybe a closet or under your bed? Another pause. Then, I'm in the basement. What's your address, sweetie? I need to know where to send help. There was a long, agonizing silence, followed by the faintest whimper. I don't know. I suppressed a curse under my breath. Do you see any mail or papers around you? Maybe something with your address on it? Before the child could answer, there was a loud crash on the other end of the line, followed by a scream. My heart raced as static filled the line. Hello? Are you there? I yelled. The line went dead. I immediately relayed the details to the local police, giving them everything I had, a likely location triangulated from the cell tower, the description of a child in danger, and the eerie reference to monsters. 2 officers, Daniels and Ruiz, were dispatched to investigate. I stayed glued to the monitor, my hand trembling slightly as I sipped my now cold coffee. It took them 20 minutes to reach the location, a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by woods. I listened to their updates over the radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. We're at the address. Front doors open, no immediate signs of struggle. His voice crackled over the line. What do you see? I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. Lights are flickering inside, he continued. Yard's a mess. Toys scattered everywhere, like someone left in a hurry. Officer Ruiz chimed in. No sign of anyone yet. We're going inside. My stomach twisted. I leaned closer to the monitor, willing the radio to stay connected. Seconds stretched into minutes as the officers moved through the house, their voices muffled and tense. "Basement's empty," Ruiz reported. "Looks like someone was down here recently. There's a blanket and some snacks, but no sign of the kid." "What about the windows?" I asked, remembering the child's words. "Glass is intact," Daniels replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "But there's something weird." "What do you mean?" "There are smudges on the glass, like handprints. But they're too big to be a kid's. And they're high up, like someone tall was looking in." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Anything else?" "Negative," Ruiz said. "We're heading out to check with neighbors." The neighbors were uneasy, their accounts fragmented and unsettling. Most hadn't seen or heard anything unusual, except for Mrs. Hartman, an older woman who lived 2 houses down. "I heard noises," she told the officers, clutching her robe tightly. "Strange ones. Not like animals, more metallic. Like grinding or clicking." It was just after 10. "What about lights?" Daniels asked. Mrs. Hartman hesitated, her eyes darting toward the dark woods behind her house. "Yes," she whispered. "There were lights. Up there." She pointed toward the sky. "But they weren't normal. They moved wrong." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Another neighbor mentioned seeing a faint glow near the tree line but dismissed it as kids playing with flashlights. The pieces didn't add up. A missing child, strange noises, lights in the sky, it all felt too bizarre. But the worst was yet to come. As the officers prepared to wrap up, Daniels decided to do one last sweep of the yard. The beam of his flashlight skimmed the ground, illuminating scattered toys and damp grass. Then he froze. "Dispatch, this is Daniels," he said, his voice tight. "I think we've got something." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "A footprint," he replied. "But it's not human." I swallowed hard. "Describe it." "It's large," he said after a pause. "About twice the size of my boot. Clawed, with deep impressions. Whatever made this was heavy." A cold silence followed. Even over the radio, I could sense their unease. "Get a photo," I managed to say. "And be careful." Daniels didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's only one print. No trail, no other marks. Just this." The call ended soon after. The footprint was logged as evidence, but no one could identify its origin. The child was never found, and the case remains open. I quit my job as a 911 operator 2 months later. I tell myself it was the long hours, the stress, the emotional toll. But deep down, I know the truth. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the child's voice, trembling and afraid. They're outside. It wasn't over. I thought it was, after the empty house and the footprint that led nowhere. But when I heard about the nanny cam, I was dragged right back into it. Detective Sarah Grayson was leading the investigation, a seasoned professional with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor you'd expect from someone who'd seen it all. But even she seemed unnerved when she called to brief me. "We found a nanny cam," she said. Her voice was tight, like she was forcing herself to keep it together. "You're gonna want to hear this." I wasn't sure why she looped me in. Maybe because I was the first person to hear the child's voice, or maybe she just needed someone else to share the weight of whatever she'd uncovered. I met her at the station the next day. Grayson looked tired, her sharp features shadowed with exhaustion. She led me to a small room where a laptop sat on the table. The screen displayed a paused video, the interior of the missing family's living room. "This is from a nanny cam the family had hidden in the corner," she explained. Motion activated. It started recording shortly before the 911 call. She hit play. At first, the footage was ordinary. The camera captured the cozy living room, a couch piled with blankets, a television against the far wall, and a few scattered toys on the floor. Then the child appeared, a boy, maybe 7 or 8, clutching a cordless phone. He was crying. I felt my stomach twist as I recognized his voice. "They're outside," he whispered, just as he ended the call. The boy crept toward the window, the phone pressed to his ear. His small hand pointed at something outside. The camera's angle didn't show what he was looking at, but his terror was palpable. Then he screamed. The sound was raw, primal. It sent shivers down my spine. The video glitched. The screen flickered with static for several seconds, and when it cleared, the boy was gone. The living room was empty, except for the faintest movement outside the window, shadowy figures, indistinct and almost humanoid, shifting in and out of view. The footage ended abruptly. Grayson closed the laptop and exhaled shakily. "That's all we've got. No signs of where the family went, no follow-up footage. Just that." "Did you see the shadows?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She nodded. "We've analyzed the video a dozen times. It's not a trick of the light, and it doesn't match any known phenomena. Whatever those things are, they're real." The room fell silent. I thought about the child's scream, the clawed footprint, and the strange lights the neighbors had described. It felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't put together. Grayson didn't seem like the type to be easily shaken, but over the next few days, something changed in her. She looked more exhausted each time I saw her, her usual sharpness dulled by a growing paranoia. It started with small things. She mentioned hearing faint noises at night, a child's voice calling her name just outside her window. Then there were scratches on her car, deep grooves that no one could explain. She said she was having dreams, too, of the missing family standing at the edge of the woods, their faces blank and featureless. "They're in my head," she admitted one day, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "I don't know how, but they are." Grayson's breaking point came when she returned to the house. She didn't tell me why she went back, only that she couldn't shake the feeling she'd missed something. "I was drawn to the basement," she said later, her voice a haunted whisper. "I don't know why." The basement was as empty as it had been during the initial search. But as she examined the walls, her flashlight caught the faint outline of something, a small, square panel, almost invisible against the wood. A hidden crawl space. Inside, Grayson found a diary. The leather-bound book was old and worn, its pages filled with the looping handwriting of the missing mother. The entries started innocently enough, notes about daily life, the child's school projects, and family outings. But as Grayson read on, the tone shifted. At first, the mother described minor disturbances, strange noises outside at night, an odd feeling of being watched. Then the entries became darker. "I saw something tonight. It was standing in the yard, just beyond the tree line. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, its limbs too long. I thought it was a trick of the light, but it moved." The boy keeps saying he hears voices at night. I told him it's just the wind, but I'm not sure anymore. They're getting closer. I see them at the windows now. I don't know what they want, but I can feel them watching us. The final entry was scrawled in shaky handwriting, almost illegible. They're inside. Grayson closed the diary and sat in silence for what felt like hours. When she finally looked up, her hands were trembling and her face was pale. "What do we do with this?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. After finding the diary, Grayson became more withdrawn. She stopped answering my calls and began missing work. I heard rumors from her colleagues, how she'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, how she'd started locking her doors and windows obsessively. I tried to convince myself it wasn't connected, that whatever was happening to her was just stress, or maybe grief over the unsolved case. But deep down, I knew better. The shadows in the footage, the clawed footprint, the child's voice whispering in the dark. It wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I didn't know how far this case would drag me into its depths. After hearing Grayson's account of the crawlspace and the diary, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. But the deeper we dug, the more the house gave up its secrets, and the more disturbing the picture became. Grayson didn't return to the station after her discovery. She handed the diary over to me and insisted I continue the investigation. I can't be near that place anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wouldn't elaborate. I couldn't blame her. The diary was heavier than it looked, its leather cover worn and cracked, its pages filled with the mother's trembling script. I began to piece together a chilling timeline of the weeks leading up to the family's disappearance. At first, the entries were small observations. I thought I saw something in the yard tonight. Just shadows, probably. The boy says it's the monsters. I think he's just being imaginative. Then, a growing unease crept in. Things keep going missing, small objects at first. The remote. A hairbrush. I found my wedding ring in the fridge yesterday. Am I losing my mind? The mother's handwriting became more erratic as the entries progressed, her fear palpable. They're watching us. I see them out there at night, just beyond the trees. Long limbs. Too many eyes. I don't know how to describe them. The boy says they're getting closer. Last night, I woke up to find Mark standing at the window. He was muttering something, "They're coming, they're coming." I shook him, and he didn't respond. When he finally turned to me, his eyes looked wrong. Empty. The final entry was almost illegible, scrawled in a frenzy. "They're here. Mark let them in. God help us." Armed with this new information, I returned to the house with a team. I didn't want to go alone, not after everything we'd seen. The crawlspace where Grayson had found the diary felt colder than the rest of the basement. My flashlight beam flickered as I crawled inside. That's when I noticed them, carvings etched into the wooden floorboards. The symbols were intricate, almost hypnotic in their design. Circles within circles, intersected by jagged lines and strange runes. I snapped photos and sent them to an expert in occult symbology. It didn't take long for a response. "These are old," the expert said. "Very old. They match patterns associated with disappearances in the region, ritualistic symbols, likely used to summon or invite something." "Invite what?" I asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not human. The diary and the carvings haunted me. I couldn't stop going over the details, trying to make sense of it all. Late one night, I was at my desk, the diary open in front of me, its pages glowing faintly under the harsh light of my desk lamp. I was reading the mother's final entry for the 10th time when something changed. The room felt wrong. Heavier, like the air had thickened around me. My vision blurred, and my head throbbed with a sudden, blinding pain. And then, nothing. When I woke up, I was slumped in the driver's seat of my car. It was dawn. My hands were freezing, and my breath fogged the windshield. I wasn't in the station parking lot. I wasn't even in town. I was miles away, parked on the shoulder of a desolate road I didn't recognize. The diary was on the passenger seat, open to a page I hadn't seen before. The words weren't written in English or any language I could identify. The handwriting was jagged, almost claw-like, and the symbols mirrored the carvings in the house. I stared at the page, my heart pounding. My mind raced to piece together what had happened, but no explanation made sense. I was left with one undeniable truth. This wasn't over. Whatever had taken the family, whatever had left those symbols in the house, it was reaching out. And now, it had its sights set on me. The woods felt different. It wasn't just the shadows stretching unnaturally or the pervasive silence broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. It was as though the forest itself had been waiting for us. The search expanded after the diary's contents and the carvings pointed us towards something more sinister than a typical disappearance. Teams were dispatched in grid patterns, combing the area around the house. I joined the lead group, unable to shake the feeling that this was something I needed to see through personally. It didn't take long to find traces of the family. A uniformed officer called out, his flashlight illuminating something dangling from a low tree branch. As we approached, the metallic glint of a ring caught my eye. The father's wedding band. It was perfectly placed, as though someone, or something, had deliberately hung it there. Below it, we found something even more chilling, a piece of crumpled paper. Flattening it out, I saw it was a child's drawing, the crayon strokes jagged and hurried. Shadowy figures loomed over a small, stick-figure family. A bright red X was scrawled where the house should have been. "This doesn't feel right," muttered Officer Daniels, his voice trembling. "It's like they want us to find this." I couldn't disagree. It felt orchestrated, as though we were being led deeper. As we continued, the woods began to turn against us. First, our radios failed. Every frequency was drowned in static, punctuated by faint whispers we couldn't decipher. Then, Officer Harris swore he saw movement, a figure darting between the trees, but no one else caught a glimpse. A chilling pattern emerged. Team members began hearing things, faint laughter, a child's voice calling for help, the rustle of footsteps trailing just behind us. The sound stopped abruptly whenever we turned to look. Then, Officer Martinez vanished. One moment, he was beside me, his flashlight beam cutting through the underbrush. The next, he was gone. We shouted his name, fanning out in panic. 10 agonizing minutes passed before he stumbled back into view, his face pale and eyes unfocused. "Where did you go?" I demanded, gripping his shoulders. He blinked at me, confused. "I don't know. I was here, and then I wasn't." When I pressed further, he simply shook his head, unable or unwilling to explain. The deeper we ventured, the more the diary's entries began to echo in my mind. The mother's paranoia about shadows. the father's trance-like state. The low hum she described, which I could now feel vibrating faintly in my chest. Was I imagining it? Or had the case begun to warp my perception of reality? The team seemed to feel it too. Daniels began muttering to himself, clutching a rosary I hadn't seen him carry before. Harris refused to walk at the back of the line, insisting he kept seeing something following us. Even I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I cared to admit. And then we found it. The trees thinned out, revealing a small clearing dominated by an unnatural pit. It was deep, impossibly so, and perfectly circular, its edges smooth as though carved by something beyond human means. A low hum emanated from within, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. I stepped closer, peering into the darkness. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the void, but I caught glimpses of movement. Flickers of something shifting far below, too far to discern clearly. "It's alive," whispered Daniels, his voice barely audible over the hum. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was frozen, torn between the compulsion to look deeper and the overwhelming urge to run. Suddenly, the hum grew louder, almost deafening. The movement in the pit became more pronounced, the flickers coalescing into shapes I couldn't comprehend, shapes that didn't belong in this world. Then, I heard it. A child's voice, faint but unmistakable, echoing up from the depths. "Help us." My heart seized. It was the missing boy. I was sure of it. But how? Why? The question spiraled in my mind as the pit seemed to pulse, the hum turning into a low, guttural growl. Something was coming. Something I wasn't ready to face. "Step back," I ordered, my voice shaking as I turned to the team. But they were already retreating, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. I stayed rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze away from the abyss. The shapes grew closer, the growl louder, and the voice. "Help us." It wasn't just the boy anymore. It was the mother, the father. Their voices layered, pleading, crying out from the void. But I knew, deep down, that whatever was in that pit wasn't them. At least, not anymore. I don't remember the exact moment I decided to descend. Perhaps it was the pleading voices echoing from the depths or the unnerving certainty that the answers lay below. Whatever it was, the pit called to me, and I couldn't ignore it. Securing a rope from the search team's supplies, I tied it around the trunk of a nearby tree. The others protested, their voices taut with fear, but I silenced them with a look. This wasn't up for debate. The hum grew louder as I lowered myself into the darkness. My flashlight barely pierced the void, its beam swallowed by an unnatural blackness that seemed alive. The air grew colder with every foot of descent, and an acrid, metallic tang filled my nostrils. As I neared the bottom, the rope went slack beneath me. My boots hit solid ground, but it didn't feel like dirt or rock. The surface was unnervingly smooth, as though the pit's floor had been deliberately polished. Then I saw them. The pit opened into a sprawling network of tunnels. Their walls were etched with symbols similar to those carved into the floorboards of the house, occult patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift when I looked directly at them. My flashlight flickered, its light struggling to stay constant, and the hum now came in waves, rising and falling like breath. Scattered throughout the tunnels were remnants of the past. Tattered clothing. A child's toy car, its paint chipped and wheels missing. A rusted watch, its hands frozen in time. These weren't just items, they were fragments of lives that had been swallowed by whatever resided here. And then the whispers began. At first, I thought it was my imagination. A trick of the mind in a place so utterly alien. But the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of distorted voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then I saw them. Humanoid shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, phasing in and out of sight like static on a television screen. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, their limbs bending at impossible angles. Their faces, or what passed for them, were voids, empty spaces where features should have been. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creatures didn't seem to notice me at first, their attention focused elsewhere. But the moment my flashlight beam landed on one, it turned. The whispering stopped. And then they moved. The creatures surged toward me, their distorted forms flickering with each step. I ran, my heart pounding as I twisted through the tunnels, the flashlight jerking in my hand. The walls seemed to close in, the symbols glowing brighter with every step I took. The whispers returned, louder now, their words incomprehensible but laced with malice. I could feel the creatures closing in, their presence pressing against me like a physical weight. In my panic, I stumbled into a small alcove. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. That's when I saw it, a small metallic object lying in the dust. I snatched it up without thinking, the cold metal burning against my palm. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and I turned just in time to see one of the creatures lunge for me. I ran. The tunnels seemed endless, but somehow, I found my way back to the rope. Clambering upward, I felt the creatures below, their presence like a pull trying to drag me back. The hum grew deafening, and the rope swayed violently as though something was trying to shake me loose. But I didn't stop. I climbed until my hands were raw and bleeding, until I felt the chill of the night air against my face. The team above hauled me out, their faces pale with fear. "What the hell happened down there?" Daniels asked, his voice trembling. I couldn't answer. My hand was clenched around the metallic object, its weight a grim reminder of what I'd just escaped. Back at the station, I laid the object on the table, a small, metallic tag engraved with the name of the missing child, Ethan Carter. The room went silent as the officers stared at it. It was proof. Proof that the boy had been down there. But then it began to vanish. Before our eyes, the tag shimmered and faded, dissolving into nothingness. The room erupted in chaos, voices shouting over each other as everyone struggled to comprehend what they'd just seen. It was right there. I shouted, slamming my fist on the table. You all saw it. But their disbelief was palpable. Suspicion turned toward me, their eyes narrowing as if I'd fabricated the entire thing. Accusations flew, and the room's atmosphere shifted from shock to hostility. You expect us to believe this? Chief Hudson finally said, his tone cold. A metallic tag that conveniently vanishes? You've been acting strange since this case started. How do we know you're not behind this? The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. The room was spinning, their faces blurring into a mass of distrust. I left the station that night, my reputation in tatters and the truth buried beneath a mountain of skepticism. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I drove home, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, trailing me like a shadow. They knew. And they weren't finished with me yet. The weeks since the investigation had unraveled me. The stares from my colleagues, the hushed whispers, the way they avoided me when I walked into a room, it all became too much. I was convinced they were wrong, that there was something real, something undeniable lurking just beneath the surface. The case had consumed me, turned my mind into a labyrinth of half-formed theories and dark visions. I had to return to the house. Alone. There was no plan, no clear idea of what I was going to find. Only that I couldn't shake the need to get answers, no matter the cost. I told myself that the house was the key, that if I could find something no one else had, I could prove I wasn't insane, that I wasn't fabricating the horrors I'd witnessed. The front door creaked open as if expecting me. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air, and the familiar flickering lights seemed to beckon me further in. I took a breath, steadying myself as I descended into the basement. The basement was colder than I remembered, the air thick with the weight of something unspeakable. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when I heard it. The voices. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, maybe the whispers of the past, trapped in the walls. But then they grew clearer. The voice of a child. The mother. The father. They were still here. Their voices echoed from somewhere deep within the basement. I followed the sound, and what I found was something I could never have imagined. Against one wall of the basement stood a series of mirrors. I approached them, drawn by the familiar feeling of dread that clung to the air. The glass was old, its surface warped and cracked, but it reflected something different. The images weren't of me, not of the present. They were distorted, twisted reflections of the missing family. In one, the mother and father were standing at the window, their faces frozen in terror as shadowy shapes closed in around them. In another, the child was crying, pointing towards something just out of frame, while a dark tendril reached up to grab them. The mirrors didn't just reflect the past. They seemed to pull it from the depths of time, replaying the last moments of the family's life over and over again. I couldn't tear myself away. My eyes were locked on the scenes, watching as the family was swallowed by the shadows. But then, something changed. I felt at first an unnatural chill creeping up my spine, a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there they were. The creatures. This time, I wasn't startled by their flickering forms. I knew what they were now, who they were. The way they moved, like shadows at the edge of reality. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, their faces a blur of darkness and emptiness. They didn't speak, but I heard them, felt their thoughts crawl into my mind. They weren't just predators. They were collectors, gathering fear, feasting on the terror of those they trapped. Families were their trophies, their lives consumed by the creatures' hunger. They were not from this world. They didn't need to physically feed, their true sustenance came from the fear they cultivated. And once they had claimed their prize, an entire family torn apart by dread, they would move on to the next. I understood then. The missing family wasn't an anomaly. They were a pattern. And I was no different. The creatures began to circle around me, their cold, empty gazes fixed on my every move. I backed into the mirrors, instinctively trying to escape the oppressive pressure closing in on me. That's why I saw it. My own reflection. I had been looking at the family's final moments in the mirrors, but when I turned to face mine, something was terribly wrong. My reflection wasn't standing still. It was moving on its own, its eyes locked with mine, its mouth curling into a twisted, knowing smile. It spoke. "You've been part of the hunt all along." I froze, the words sinking into me like a weight I couldn't escape. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something else. It was the truth. Memories that I had buried for years began to resurface. The whispers from the darkness, the strange sensations that had followed me throughout my life. I wasn't just the investigator here. I had been chosen long before this case ever began. I had been a part of this world, this nightmare, for as long as I could remember. My reflection turned, walking toward the shadows. "You're one of us now. Welcome home." I felt a cold hand grip my chest, and I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the hum, the whispers, the terror. Suddenly, the house vanished. The mirrors shattered, the walls dissolved, and I found myself standing in the open air, blinking against the harsh sunlight. The house was gone, as if it had never existed at all. But I didn't feel relief. Only confusion and a rising terror. And then I heard it. The faintest sound, just barely audible. A whisper on the wind, soft and chilling. 911, what's your emergency? I spun around, and for the first time, I saw the yard where the house once stood, now empty. The toys scattered across the ground. And then I felt something cold slide down my throat, a sickening realization creeping into my bones. I wasn't outside. I was inside. The voice on the phone was mine. Hi, there are monsters outside. I closed my eyes, but the words kept coming, forced out of me as though they were never mine to speak. And then, the line went dead.